Steve Yarbrough.
Well, I'll begin by thanking Wyatt and Barbara and Megan and Adam and the entire staff. This is my 7th year in a row to come here. It's always been wonderful, but I don't think it's ever been better. I really don't. The talent here has just been incredible. Some of you know that the day that before the conference started, while I was driving here, I got a call from my father who was able to say, "I'm in trouble," and nothing more. And I kept calling him back and couldn't get him. And finally, 911, they sent everybody over, and so he was in ICU for a good part of the first week of the conference, and then was moved to the regular hospital and is home now, and I'll be going to see him tomorrow. I can't think of a better place to be when you got something bothering you than in this company. At one point, Alice came over and said, "Now, if you need to go home, I'll be happy to take all your students." And that's just the kind of atmosphere that I've seen here year after year after year. It's really something special, and we're all incredibly lucky to be a part of it. When I finished the reading, for just a moment, some of you don't know this, some of you do, that a new bluegrass band has formed here on the mountain. In honor of their advanced age, they call themselves the Franklin County Amblers. So when I finish reading, I'll ask my friends Morris Manning and Tony Early to come up. During the last year or so, occasionally I fall into the wine, and that's when I have a good musical idea. So at some point, I sent one of these little improvised things to Tony, and Tony started writing lyrics, and they're really wonderful. The first one I sent him, he said, "That sounds to me like a Baptist hymn." So I think we'll do that. And then I'm going to read from a novel in progress, which I have never done before because it terrifies me. And as far as what I need to tell you about this book, it's about an accidental encounter between two sets of characters, an American and his family, and a Polish man and his friend, and the effects that it has on everybody over a period of years. So I had hoped to read the opening section, but no matter what I do to it, it's too long. So I'm going to read just about the first half of it, and I have to tell you, we're not going to get to any kind of closure, except that I'll quit. And we aren't even going to get to a point where the stories intersect, but I did want to read something new, and I haven't been writing stories lately. I don't know the title of I do know the title of the novel, but I also know it will change, and it's embarrassing, so I won't tell you that. The title of the section that I'm going to read from is Christmas in Krakow. And I think some of you probably know that Slavic names have diminutives. So we've got a character named Richard. Sometimes he's Rishu or Rishek or etc., but it's the same guy. "You're lucky I love Ella Fitzgerald," his daughter says. "She's standing on the chair he brought in from the kitchen, and she's just successfully positioned the angel atop the tree. They bought that ornament this morning at a stall in the cloth hall. And they bought the tree yesterday outside Galeria Krakowska, and then he dragged it 10 blocks through the snow and up 5 flights of stairs. He was and is still jet-lagged, and though he goes to the gym twice a week and is in decent shape, he had to pause on each landing. Somewhere between the 3rd and 4th floors, in the offhanded manner in which the most contented among us entertain such notions, he realized that his wife, who'd grown up here with her brother, had been right a few years back, warning that one day he'd wished they'd swapped it for a flat in a building with an elevator. He doesn't have that many regrets, but the lack of a lift may become one. Anna cocks her head, looks hard at the angel, then reaches out and makes a small adjustment. We've listened to the same CD 3 times since we started decorating. Did you realize that? It's a short disc. Not that short. And it's the greatest ballad CD ever recorded. She tosses those blonde bangs. One could argue. If one did, what might one propose as an alternative? Dexter Gordon's ballads, she replies. Clifford Brown with strings. The intimate Ellington. Alternatives do exist. He's having fun. He always looks forward to decorating the tree with her, but never more so than this year. They flew 6,000 miles for the pleasure. We started with Ella, he says, so we're staying with her. It's important to maintain continuity when doing something as momentous as decorating your first Polish Christmas tree. This tree came from Norway. How do you know? The sign above the booth where you paid for it said Norwegian wood. I didn't see that. You weren't looking. She puts out her hands, sticky from sap. I'm finished, she says. Help me down. I'm too mature now to jump. He opens his arms. She steps into them, and as he lowers her to the floor, he gets a whiff of the scent she started wearing back in October after developing a crush on a kid who sits beside her in the string ensemble. She's no longer a child. She has breasts, for Christ's sake. What do you weigh these days? He wonders aloud. You know, I would have hoped that by now you'd know not to ask a person of the feminine persuasion such a question, she says. But I'll answer it anyway. 108 pounds, give or take an ounce. Gently, she pokes his stomach. What do you weigh? About 105 kilos. Like many musicians, she's also a proficient mathematician. In other words, 230 freaking pounds? Truly? It sounds a lot better in kilos. You need to take it easy on the pierogi, Dad, not to mention the goose liver pate. A shade over 6'3", he's got broad shoulders that suggest he might have made a good linebacker in his youth, though the only competitive sport he ever played was baseball. He can carry a good bit of weight. Yet he can't deny that not long ago he had to let his belt out. He's been eating and drinking a little more than he should. The last few months have not exactly been stress-free. He covers Central California for the Los Angeles Times. He's held that job for more than 2 decades, the only break coming 17 years ago, when his Polish fluency brought him here to report on the revolutions sweeping Eastern Europe. But back in September, the Times publisher was ousted after protesting cuts proposed by the parent company. Then just last month, his editor-in-chief, a close personal friend, was also forced out. What do you do if you can no longer do what you've done your entire adult life? Until recently, he didn't think he'd ever have to ask himself that question. Even now, he's not overly concerned. He knows he's good, and so does everyone at the paper and a great many people elsewhere. Still, when they return to Fresno in January, he'll send out a few feelers, just to stay on the safe side. Julia Moretska Brennan. She's 46, a year younger than he is in December of 2006. Her hair is dark as their daughter's is blonde. A list of things Richard loves about her would include, but by no means be limited to, the following. How, when he's strolling along beside her and she decides to take a left at a corner anywhere in the world, or to walk into a shop that has attracted her interest, she turns, slightly drops her left shoulder. He's always on her left, where she has trained him to canter along like her personal St. Bernard, and nudges him in the desirable direction. Years ago, the single time he remarked upon it, she replied, "What's a person like me to do when walking with a person like you?" She's a normal-sized woman, though he'd have to agree he's not a normal-sized man. You could just say, "Hey, let's go in there." Or, "Why don't we check out that street?" I like how this is working, she said. And he's never complained because basically he does too. Why waste words? Her eyes. They're large and brown and mildly convex, perfectly paired with her nose. There's no other way to put this. It's prominent. If she'd been born in Poland 20 years earlier than she was, it might have constituted a serious problem. She didn't learn she had a Jewish ancestor until her brother located their maternal great-grandmother's birth certificate. Last name, Abramovich. The way her eyes roll out of focus when she's on top of him and the orgasm ripples through her body. Her Russian. He's tried to learn that language and failed, but loves the sound. Her German. He's never attempted it and won't. Those compound nouns. How under martial law she carried an extra toothbrush with her everywhere she went in case her participation in a demonstration led to jail. She didn't tell him this. It might be perceived as boasting. He learned it from her brother. How every evening, the last thing she says before turning off the bedside light is, "When you scramble Anna's eggs in the morning, don't make them stand at attention." The wonder he heard in her voice in the fall of '89 when she looked at him across the cafe table and said, "Know what? What? I think I might love you a little." The way her mouth twists almost imperceptibly when she thinks he's full of shit. He doesn't see that expression very often these days, but it's on full display after she steps into the apartment this evening, her cap and the shoulders of her sheepskin dusted with snow, and spots him and their daughter standing there in the darkened living room, admiring the brightly lit tree, neither of them dressed for dinner. He's wearing slippers and an ancient pair of red Boston University warm-ups. "Does either of you have the slightest idea what time it is?" she asks. She sets her shopping bag down in the hallway, then shrugs out of her coat. He and Anna exchange glances. They promise to be ready at 7:15, and he knows it's at least 6:30 now. "I don't," he says. "Me either," says Anna. Julia lays her scarf aside, then bends to remove her boots. It's 6:40. The reservation's for 7:30. You two are both hopeless. "But what about our tree?" Anna asks. Her mother pulls the boots off, stands them on the clear plastic mat, then walks into the living room for a closer look. They await her assessment, pretending that it matters, even though all three of them know that this is his and Anna's turf. The tree, she finally concedes, is not hopeless. Unlike both of you, it appears to have a bright future, if only a very short one. The car is a '79 Mercedes diesel that they bought several summers ago. For much of each year, it rests under a tarp. Until yesterday, he had never driven it in cold weather. Mostly white, it features a beige rear quarter panel from a salvage shop and is missing its back bumper. The upholstery is a fungal shade of green, and at some point in the distant past, somebody, most likely a prior owner's son, deemed the dashboard lighter the perfect tool for artistic expression. On the front passenger seat, he used it to burn little rings in the vinyl, arranging them to spell the name Klaus. Mercedes or not, it's a wreck, but it runs and is that rare European vehicle with an automatic transmission. He hates stick shifts. Truth be known, he can't drive one. Julia and Anna climb in while he brushes snow off the windshield and the back glass. 5 or 6 inches have fallen. It's coming down pretty hard now, but the forecast calls for it to quit by 8 or 9 o'clock. He starts the car and pulls away from the curb, then spins a U-turn and heads toward the old town. While he drives, Julia calls Monica, and from the conversation, he can tell Stefan is still in the shower and that they'll be late too, something you can generally bank on. He thinks the world of his brother-in-law, but if he had to hold a real job, his life would be ruined. Fortunately, he doesn't need one. He's a successful crime novelist. His work published in more than 30 countries. Julia does the English translations. In Krakow, a park surrounds the old town, and with the exception of approved vehicles, automobiles are banned. So they have to circle it rather than driving straight through. Traffic is surprisingly heavy this evening. Everybody must be doing last-minute shopping, heading to or from Galeria, Krakowska, M1, or one of the other big malls. Stores will be open again tomorrow, Saturday, but virtually everything will remain closed on Sunday for Christmas Eve. He finds the country's transformation into a consumer culture both exhilarating and disquieting. Sometimes it seems that the profusion of color, the proliferation of choices has come at the cost of clarity. Insert image, a grainy Cold War street scene, peopled or not, it's up to you. Just keep it gray. No corporate logos allowed. If you want to see a Heineken sign, buy a ticket to Amsterdam. We're going to be pretty late, he says. You better call the restaurant. The reservation's in my name. Ask for Mustafa and tell him who you are. Who am I? The wife of the guy who wrote an article about his establishment for the LA Times. If Brad Pitt ever eats there, it'll be because of me. She knows he's joking. He's not given to displays of ego. Sometimes she wishes he were less self-effacing. As a rule, she hates pushiness, but he could develop some sharper elbows. If he'd spent as many hours standing in line as she did when she was younger, he probably would have had to. She pulls out her cell and he rattles off the number. It used to amaze her that he could recall such minutiae, but she long ago accepted it as a byproduct of his profession. While she's on the phone, they pass the cafe where they met. Open to the air in warm weather, it's presently protected from the elements by clear plastic curtains. The heaters must be turned up pretty high, he thinks. Icicles hang from the eaves and steam is rising off the roof. He's promised Anna they'll stop by for dessert tomorrow afternoon while her mom and her aunt finish shopping for Christmas Eve dinner. They've logged many an hour beneath that canopy, whenever possible, sitting at the table where he met her mom, whom he'd gone to interview for an article about women and solidarity. A couple of summers ago, while they waited for their order, Anna rapped the tabletop. So, she said, drawing the syllable out for several seconds, this is where the idea that resulted in me began to get a little traction, right? He didn't realize his face was heating up, but it must have been. She laughed and said, you look like a figure in an impressionist painting. You've got a red splotch on each cheek. Julia ends the call. They'll hold our reservation, she tells him. Your friend Mustafa's exact words were, please inform refulgent Mr. Richard that upon arrival he will receive supreme justice. If I didn't know otherwise, I think he was threatening to execute you. You probably should have spoken English to him. Why? Is his English better? No, but it's considerably less florid. They cross the Vistula, then start west on Monte Cassino. Once they reach the outskirts, traffic begins to thin. Before long, they're traveling through the countryside on a 2-lane highway. A lot of the nouveau riche have built villas along this route, many of them with 4 or even 5 levels. They pass one that's lit top to bottom, floodlights trained on the facade. Interspersed among these new constructions are traditional Polish farmhouses. 20 kilometers from the city, he slows down. The road that leads up the hill to the restaurant is poorly marked, and in the snow it'll be even easier to miss. I think it's just ahead, Julia says. He signals, though on this stretch of highway there are no other cars. They turn onto the narrow blacktop and drive up the hill. After a couple of kilometers, they finally see the sign. He takes a left onto an even narrower road, then drives another half kilometer, and they find themselves in the snowy parking lot. The popular dining spot is housed in a pseudo-alpine castle built by the Nazis, originally as a vacation site for Luftwaffe pilots. By the end of the war, it had become a Wehrmacht hospital, and under the communists, it served as the Institute of Forestry. Now it belongs to a wealthy Kurdish family who fled Saddam in the 90s, then bought and remodeled the rundown structure and established a Polish-Kurdish restaurant. The idea is disjunctive enough to make it wildly appealing, which explains why even on a night like this, the parking lot is jammed. He eventually locates a place between a Maserati and a Land Rover, the latter displaying a Croatian license plate. Someone else has come a long way for dinner. Bogdan Baranovsky sits on one of the checkout counters in the dimly lit grocery, watching it snow and thinking of Darth Vader. He didn't see the Star Wars movies when they originally appeared in Poland. That was back in the 80s, before the big changes. During those years, he was working at the produce warehouse, first as his father-in-law's assistant, then as the manager. He didn't have time to see a movie or do much of anything else except worry about the refrigeration unit that seemed to break down every couple of weeks, or the loading dock that drunken truck drivers kept hitting. Anyway, he didn't give a damn about science fiction. His concerns were all real and immediate. His wife, his son, the flat they hoped to move into so they could be on their own. He finally saw the films sometime in the mid-90s, and he only went then because Adam wanted to see them. Bogdan fell asleep during each one. The rigmarole about the dark side, the Death Star, he thought it was ridiculous. The only part that drew his attention was the grand finale in Return of the Jedi, during which Vader killed Palpatine to save Luke's life, in turn suffering a mortal wound. When Vader insisted Luke remove his mask, enabling him to see the face of his dying father, Bogdan got a case of the sniffles. His own father left when he was 2 years old, running off after some woman from Gdansk. He didn't even know what he looked like. 10 years later, the stuff about the Dark Star and the Death Side no longer seemed silly. In 2000, Western heavyweights like Carrefour and Tesco moved in, and the promising little grocery chain he and his partner Marek formed in 1991 slipped into decline. They owned 4 stores in '99, 3 in 2003, 2 in 2005. Now they're down to this one, with a rent payment due on January 15th that they lack the funds for. Their supplier of fruits and vegetables has notified them their deliveries will be suspended pending settlement of their account. They're in trouble with several other suppliers too. Their last store occupies the ground floor of a dingy gray block that was purchased 18 months ago by a young developer. Not yet 30, he drives a brand new Saab, wears Italian suits, speaks English, and takes vacations in places like Barbados. Tall, slim, and affable, he delivers bad news in person, always with an air of regret. So far, he's succeeded in evicting over half of the tenants from the flats on the floors above. His partner, Marek, is convinced that if those residents hadn't been forced to relocate, they wouldn't be in the shape they're in now, since for years all of them were reliable customers. Bogdan thinks otherwise. Some quit shopping here before the new owner assumed control of the building. And anyway, all their other stores fell too, even the one that used to be the most profitable. In all fairness, he and Marek aren't complete fools. Both of them have been to Western Europe, and Marek once visited relatives in the U.S. When they first started out, they knew what Western supermarkets looked like. Bright colors splashed everywhere, countless versions of the same product, all packaged differently and positioned at various price points. The label on each item fronted with military precision, aisles as broad as the Champs-Élysées. So shoppers can roll their carts past one another without toppling floor supplies. They understood what was coming and believed they could counter it. They took over formerly state-run stores and made few, if any, cosmetic changes. The predominant shade remained gray. They didn't install sound systems to pipe in elevator music, and initially they retained the employees who'd worked in the stores when they were owned by the state. This last practice produced the first hiccups. In a country where nearly everything belonged to the state and nearly everybody viewed it as corrupt, cheating had been tolerated. Bogdan never did it, but back when he managed the warehouse, he knew that the guys who loaded and unloaded produce took a little bit home. A few bananas here, a few apples there. As long as it didn't get out of hand, he looked the other way, just as his father-in-law had. The people who worked the checkout stands in the first stores they opened were mostly women in their 40s and 50s. They'd learned the appropriate survival tactics, and ingrained practices die hard. Initially, they skimmed a few zlotys from the cash registers, but Bogdan put a stop to that by changing the drawers out several times a day. So they began overcharging the customers or shortchanging them, and complaints escalated. Finally, he called a meeting. "Listen," he told them, "things aren't like they used to be. You just can't keep cheating our customers. It has to stop." A woman who reminded him of his grandmother asked, "Why do you care? It's not your money. If you steal from the customers, they'll quit shopping here. They'll go someplace they don't get cheated. It's really pretty simple." Even as he made the statement, he knew it wasn't true. It wasn't simple for her, and it wasn't simple for lots of others. The world was changing faster than they could. Once people accept the notion that an old car ought to cost more than a new one because the old one is readily available, but you can only acquire the new one by paying up front, putting your name on a list, and waiting 10 years, it's hard to sell them the opposite reality. If you've lived your whole life upside down, living right side up is like walking on the ceiling. "I don't want to work here anymore," the woman said. With horror, he realized tears were on the way, and he prayed they wouldn't flow right there in front of him and the other employees. She pulled her apron off, flung it on the counter, grabbed her coat, and walked out. He stayed awake a long time that night, drinking vodka and feeling like a predator. Now he's become prey. Unfortunately, just to go ahead and get this said, his troubles are not limited to the commercial sphere. Around the same time that the business losses began, Adam forged some bad friendships. Krisha claims there were signs, and though she won't say what they were, Bogdan never disputes it. He knows he wasn't paying attention, that his mind was always elsewhere. So what can he say? They haven't seen him now for more than 3 years. They don't know where he is, if he's even still alive. Though neither has told the other one this, because they don't tell each other much of anything anymore, both of them suffer the standard issue nightmares of failed parents the world over. A young man hunkers beneath an overpass, long hair, ragged beard. Nearby stands a shopping cart containing a grimy coat, some old newspapers, a tattered sleeping bag, cast-off boots. A silver BMW pulls up in front of the store at 8:15 and blinks its lights 3 times. At first, he can't believe it, so he doesn't move. 15 or 20 seconds pass. Then the driver blinks again. "Oh, Jezu," he says to the empty store, "Matka Boska." He reaches under the counter and grabs the sack of kielbasa. Then he puts on his coat and sticks his hand in the pocket to make sure the balaclava is still there. It's black and made of wool and has holes for the eyes and mouth. When he tried it on in the bathroom, he immediately began to itch. He's always been allergic to wool, but this was the only one he could find at the sporting goods store. In the mirror, he looked like a Chechen terrorist. He steps outside, locks the front doors, then lowers the security grating and locks it too. He walks over to the silver sedan, stamps the snow off his shoes, and opens the door. "Is this your brother-in-law's car?" he asks, lowering himself into the passenger seat. It feels like sinking into a leather sofa. "You're a genius." He reaches for the door, but hears a faint whooshing sound as it slowly closes itself. Mark grins, his teeth white and perfect. Unlike Bogdan, he still has a head full of dark hair that's only slightly shorter than it was in his teens. "Nice, huh? Did you tell him what you planned to do? If you did, admit it right now and I'll get out. I'll probably get out anyway." As if to prevent that, Mark throws the car in gear and pulls away from the curb. "Of course not. They flew to London to spend Christmas with their son and his family and asked us to feed their cats. I borrowed it for the evening." His wife's brother launched a small brewery around the time he and Bogdan founded their grocery chain. 5 years ago, Heineken bought it. Now they've got a big house, a smaller one in Zakopane, and a BMW. It does happen. "What model is this?" he asked. 760-something. Under the hood, there's a V12. If we need speed, we've got it, but we won't need it. "How many of these cars do you suppose there are in the whole country?" "More than you'd ever guess." The emphasis doesn't pass unnoticed. Despite everything's gone wrong for both of them, Mark has maintained his sunny outlook. He's been like that as long as Bogdan has known him, all the way back to elementary school. He's enough of a realist to admit he's never had a truly great idea, but too much of an optimist not to think he'll have one eventually. As a rule, Bogdan finds such perpetual good cheer grating. But lately, the presence of a hopeful friend, no matter how deluded, may be the only thing stopping him from walking into the frozen food locker, lying down and closing his eyes. The truth, which he's incapable of admitting, is that he needs Mark. Almost everybody needs a Mark, if only to resent his existence. Since we're stealing your brother-in-law's car, he says, why don't we just go over to their house and rob them instead? Ignoring the question, Mark hangs the left, bound for the Grunwald Bridge. The snow is falling harder in defiance of the forecast. You know how this guy got started? What guy? The one whose place we're going to visit. How? Summer of '90, he starts hanging around the Auschwitz train station. This is before all those fancy buses started ferrying visitors around from one concentration camp to another. When he sees some Americans waiting on the platform for a train to Krakow, he ambles over and tells them the train will take nearly 3 hours to cover the 70 kilometers, that the bathrooms are filthy and smelly and there's no soap or toilet paper, and then he offers to deliver them in under an hour for $50. Now, you know how impatient and finicky Americans are. A couple of times a day, all summer long, somebody accepts his offer. He converts the dollars on the black market, and come September, he's got enough to start his construction business. Next thing you know, he's the go-to guy if you've made a bundle and want to build your own private swimming pool. They're crossing the Vistula. Right in the middle, there's a sheet of ice, though the water's still flowing on either side. How goddamn rich can you get, Bogdan asked, building private swimming pools in Poland? Did it ever occur to you that if you got enough money in a big enough house, you can put the fucking swimming pool inside? With a gloved finger, Mark thumps the steering wheel. He can only stomach so much defeatism. Even if the world is shit, why not call it manure? It leaves a better odor. No, it didn't, he says, shaking his head as if such short-sightedness is not just sad but unseemly. Besides, that's not all he does. So what else does he do? He builds hot tubs, saunas, and heated dog houses. By the way, you didn't forget the kielbasa. No, I didn't. Did you get your stuff? Mark pats his coat pocket. Right here. Give me a little credit. I hope you got the dose right. I guarantee you I do. I don't know how you can guarantee that when you never laid eyes on the creature. The average weight of a German Shepherd is 30 to 40 kilos, and my cousin says this one's just regular sized. To be on the safe side, I'm estimating 40. The safe side for who? Us or the dog? We're people. It's a member of the animal kingdom. Besides, if it gets a little juice extra, all it'll do is sleep longer. Bogdan loves dogs. He's always loved them. As a boy, he wanted one more than anything, but his mother said no. He'd rather starve to death than harm a dog. You sure about that, he asked. Totally. How do you know? I asked the vet. What vet? The one who sold it to me. This is not a good sign. You said you were getting it from a fucking farmer. Well, I had to say that to keep you from backing out. See, you're scared now. Of course I'm scared. We're driving around in a snowstorm in a stolen BMW on our way to commit a crime. And you're telling me you bought a controlled substance from a vet and asked his advice about how to tranquilize a guard dog? Stop this car right now. Relax. The vet's in Rabka. In the mountains? What were you doing down there? Going to see the vet? And telling him what? When you know Marek Fitzovsky as well as he does, you can tell when inspiration pays him one of its not infrequent visits. His face, young beyond its years, becomes even more boyish. In the greenish dashboard glow, the corners of his mouth have advanced with wide delight. He looks as happy as he did in 5th grade when they slipped away at recess with a bottle of vodka they'd stolen and drank it behind the wall at the cemetery. Bogdan got sick that day, and he's feeling sick right now. This night could end badly. It will end badly. He can all but guarantee it. The vet wasn't really a he, Mark announces. It was a her. I don't care if it was a plow horse. Well, now, funny you should mention a plow horse, because the day I went to see this vet, her foot was in a cast. She'd been trying to vaccinate a horse the night before, and it stepped on her and crushed her instep. I just told her I needed to knock my dog out for several hours because we were having our kitchen painted, and a couple years earlier he'd bitten a plumber. This poor young woman was in terrific pain, and she just gave me what I needed, no questions asked. She was drugged herself and probably didn't remember the encounter an hour later. I felt pretty bad for her. I hugged her before I left, and the way she pressed herself against me, well, I'll be honest. If she'd offered to give me a rabies shot, I would have seized the chance to drop my drawers. You got to take that first step somehow. He probably walked into the closest veterinary office, greased the palm of some assistant with access to the medicine cabinet, and walked out with a syringe and a vial of liquid. Bogdan would just have to hope that he didn't say so much that he made himself memorable. Because the truth is that if they don't come up with somewhere in the neighborhood of 50,000 zlotys in the next few days, their last store will go the way of all the others. He's 48 years old with thinning hair and a potbelly. Sometimes in the morning, while they move around the kitchen, making their separate breakfast, he catches Krisha staring at him. She's quick to look away, but there's no mistaking her expression. It's not distaste, it's not disappointment, it isn't even pity. It's astonishment. How can someone who used to do so many things so well suddenly become incapable of doing even one thing right? When they had almost nothing and were still sleeping on the folding sofa at her parents' small flat, all he needed to do was lay his hand anywhere on her body, even someplace supposedly unerogenous, like her kneecap, to make her quiver. Now, if he touches her, she stiffens. He can't even recall the last time they kissed. The snow falls harder, and they climb higher, finally cresting a big hill and then beginning their descent into a valley. You can see several clusters of lights down there, each one distant from the others, all of them gauzy, as if viewed through a layer of cheesecloth. Leaning back, Stefan Moretsky pats his stomach. With his wild shock of salt and pepper hair and matching beard, he looks strikingly like Jerry Garcia and is appropriately a devotee of the Grateful Dead. I just ate a meal, he announces, worthy of a German field marshal. By the way, did you know that one of them died upstairs, Rishu, in 45, right before our liberators arrived? Richard is still working on his duck. On each trip to this country, the first time he steps into a restaurant, even one like this that offers the potential for exotic dishes, he orders the same thing, roast duck with apples. Stefan thinks that since his mother was a Polish immigrant, this must have been his favorite dish growing up, and that because he lost her several years ago, he orders it as an act of homage. He knows this is what his brother-in-law believes because he reads his novels. In the most recent, a minor character clearly based on Richard appeared in a couple of scenes. When he ordered his duck, he was assigned a point of view for all of 2 paragraphs, solely so the reader could learn just how mawkishly sentimental a certain type of Polish American could be. The reality, at least in Richard's opinion, is more revealing than the fiction. His mother never cooked Polish food. His father, north of Boston Irish, doesn't like much of anything except roast beef, fried cod, lamb stew, and boiled potatoes. Richard never got to eat roast duck until he came here back in '89, and the first time he had it, he was with Julia. And now she won't cook it either because she's worried about his cholesterol. He orders the goddamn duck because he loves it. That's why most people choose one dish over another. I guess I didn't know that about the field marshal, he says. Which one was it? His brother-in-law rolls his eyes toward the vaulted ceiling, admiring the inlaid crystals. Von Hotzendorf, I think. Stefan has his own personal relationship with truth, and it seldom involves adherence to fact. Right now, he's probably trying out the field marshal business because he likes the atmosphere and is thinking of setting a scene here. Generally, Richard lets these moments slide by, but sometimes he can't resist calling him out. Von Hotzendorf's from the First War, he says. He died 8 or 9 years before Hitler took power. Well, then it must have been some other Von, Stefan says cheerfully. He turns to Frank, who's laboring over his wild boar and hasn't said 2 words since they sat down. You better get moving on that, he tells his son. They've got some great desserts here, and you'll be ineligible if you leave that much on your plate. The boy's cheeks turn red. Always fairly quiet, he's been doted on for most of his life by his sister, but in September she embarked on a degree at Georgetown and has remained in the U.S. for the holidays. His mother plays viola in the Krakow Philharmonic and is often away at night, and his father makes frequent jaunts to foreign countries as new books are released. Looking at him now, Richard senses that Frank feels very much alone. The poor kid's by himself too much, and puberty's on the way if it hasn't already struck. Give him time, Uncle Stefik, Anna says. I thought old people were supposed to be more patient than the young. You little lawyer, Stefan says. Then to Richard, I see she takes after my sister. Yeah, Richard agrees. She's absorbed a few of her mom's character traits. You two are discussing them as if they weren't sitting at the same table, Monica says, like it's guys' night out. It's offensive. Richard's sister-in-law has always been a mystery to him. A small, shapely woman who dyes her hair so black it's nearly blue, she usually doesn't say much. But when she does speak, she stares at you like you're the score of a concerto she's playing. This never fails to cause him discomfort, and he's occasionally had the feeling that she knows and enjoys it. Why that would be so, he can't imagine. As though reading his mind, Stefan says, I think maybe it's time for the guys to go have a smoke. He pulls a pair of cigars from his jacket. Guess where these came from? They're Cuban? His brother-in-law grins. The benefits of being un-American. Richard chews the last bit of duck and lays down his knife and fork. The parking lot? Stefan gestures at the window and beyond it the snow-covered balcony. They excuse themselves and wind their way between the tables. The other diners are well-dressed, and Richard hears a smattering of German, a phrase or two that he thinks might be Croatian, a fair amount of English. There's jazz on the sound system. Someday my prince will come. The balcony doors are locked. Before they can turn and start toward the parking lot, the owner appears from nowhere. Though he greeted Richard and his family on the way in, showing him for the 3rd time his own framed article hanging behind the maitre d' stand, you normally won't see him in the dining room. His attire tonight is eye-popping, a suit more purple than brown, an orange shirt, emerald tie. He wears a couple of rings on each hand. Because his hair is completely white, you might think you were in the presence of an extravagantly elegant 70-year-old, but he's actually in his early 50s. Stefan is used to his Polish. You gentlemen wish to merge with nature, he asks. Yes, Stefan says, as long as we can pollute it. Unearthly writers never desanitize, Mustafa says. They aromatize and characterize. He snaps his fingers at a waiter, bows, and bids them goodbye. The door closes behind them and they light their cigars. The snow has slacked off considerably. Down below, you can see the lights of a few villas and farmhouses, and to the southwest, the runway lights at the airport. It's cold, but not that cold, especially if you're full of food and wine. Is it my imagination, Richard asked, or is Monica on edge? Stefan draws deeply on the cigar, then looses a puff of sweet-smelling smoke. Rishik, I've always felt you were wasted on journalism. With your sense of seismography, you ought to be a novelist. Is she upset because Carolina didn't return for the holidays? Not a bit. So if Monica's not missing her, why is she so brittle? He doesn't really expect an answer or want one either. He's just making small talk. Mostly that's what he and Stefan do. They talk about his brother-in-law's book sales or the plot of his next crime novel or Janis Joplin or Arnold Schwarzenegger. I had this little thing going on locally, Stefan says, and she's not used to that. The protagonist in his novels, a middle-aged detective in the Krakow Police Department, repeatedly cheats on his wife, often with 3 or 4 different women over the course of a 300-page book. The twist is that he never pursues younger lovers. They're always at least his age and sometimes even older. His forte is highly atmospheric, mature sex. He calls on them with weary eyelids, a bottle of Agribi-Cava, a tin of pasteurized roe, a chunk of smoked sheep cheese, cranberry relish. The world may be changing, but his actions affirm that in matters of the heart, he adheres to the old ways. He kisses their hands coming and going. What kind of little thing? Richard asked. She's 22, works at that record store on Florianska. He wouldn't be able to conceal his dismay if he tried, which he's not inclined to do. Jesus, the blonde with that milky white complexion? The girl looks about as old as Anna. If you think what you've seen of her is milky white, Stefan says, you ought to... Well, you don't like hearing this, do you? Not especially. Stefan laughs and pats his shoulder. I felt sure you wouldn't. But the setup's perfect, and I couldn't help but want to watch your reaction. He sucks hard on the cigar, the tip of it glowing bright orange. 2 brothers-in-law, alone outdoors on a snowy night. One of them utterly, blindly infatuated with his wife. The other, a hedonistic rake. Don't be surprised if this appears in a novel. Richard won't be. What surprises me is her age. Several of her predecessors were a year or 2 younger. Rishu, our good detectives' consorts are camouflage. They serve their purpose, though you should see some of the women who hit on me at book signings. The problem with this latest one's not her age, it's the fact that she lives in Krakow. I broke it off last week, but just yesterday I glanced out the window and saw her standing on the sidewalk watching our building. I suspect I may have fucked up. It's Clinton-esque. Does Monica know? She does, and she doesn't. In other words, she hasn't been told. I'm sure she has no idea who it is, at least not yet. So are you going to tell her? Is that what you'd do if you were in my shoes? The only people who can truthfully say how they'd behave in any given situation are, by and large, people Richard does not want to know. I'm pretty sure that I'd tell her, he says. I'm pretty sure you would too. Of course, you'd never put yourself in this position to begin with. He gestures toward the dining room. In there at that table, you've got everything you need. You've even got everything you want. Why argue with the truth? In Richard's profession, you travel a good bit and see a lot of different people, a fair number of whom are women. He spends the occasional night in L.A. and sometimes has dinner with a film producer in her early 30s whose love life he knows is a disaster. The melting nature of her goodnight hugs has led to the suspicion that if he wanted to, he probably could get himself invited back to her place or entice her to his room. It's not that he finds her unattractive, or that her relative youth has summoned scruples an available woman closer to his own age might have easily breached. It's just that he's already found what he spent his 20s looking for. How this came to be seems every bit as mysterious now as it did 17 years ago. A geopolitical event got him sent halfway around the world, and he stumbled across the right person. That his domestic happiness is firmly grounded in happenstance sometimes unsettles him. But when he looks around at other contented couples, their stories are often similar. You can't say why fate smiles at some and sneers at others. In a moment, he and his brother-in-law, who writes fiction and lives it too, will go back inside and join their families for dessert. Mustafa will send over some cognac on the house, and Stefan will pronounce it the best he's ever tasted. Christmas plans made, they'll say their good nights, and when Richard bends to hug his sister-in-law, she'll balance on her toes and whisper, "I'm sorry I snapped at you. Don't be angry." She will kiss him on the mouth, something she's never done before. It will surprise him, but he's going to forget it within the hour and will not think of it again for a long time. Before any of that can occur, though, he asks Stefan the obligatory question, "What is it you want but haven't got?" "I don't know. I have some of it. I just don't have all of it." And truthfully, Rishu, if I were to find the missing element, you know what I suspect would happen? Richard takes a deep breath from his cigar, then blows out a cloud of smoke. He watches it disperse, the tiny particles spreading over the hillside, beyond the treetops, growing farther away from each other. "What?" he asks. Stefan brushes a few snowflakes from his hair. "I feel all but certain that it would spell the end of me. With no need to hunt, I'd be a dead duck. One day I might show up on your plate." He's drunk a good bit, and his bladder's overly taxed. So he asks Julia and Anna to wait in the foyer while he pays a visit to the bathroom. To write news the way he believes it should be written, you need to notice plenty of seemingly random details, because life isn't just the big things. It's all the little ones too. For instance, a makeshift clock mounted on the wall in the bedroom of a boy killed by a stray bullet in Delano, California in May of '93. The clock's hands were wooden skewers, one longer than the other, both of them glued to the hub of an electric motor that jutted through the spindle hole of a record which served as the clock face. The title of the record, Internal Exile, by the Chicano rock band Los Illegals. Where the boy came across the recording, which by then was more than 10 years old, or what it might have meant to him, his grandmother who raised him couldn't say. But she knew he built the clock for his 7th grade science project. Any good reporter notices a few things like that, but he likes to think he notices more than most. Retained from his visit to the bathroom tonight. In the urinal, there's a cherry deodorant cake. The correct term for these items is urinal deodorant block. They're also known as piss pucks. If you look into the question more deeply, you find that in cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland, with their large concentrations of Polish immigrants, Polonophobes used to dub them Polish mints. The thing is, you never see urinal deodorant cakes in Poland. While this particular receptacle contains one is puzzling it, there it is, lodged near the trap. He finishes, shakes himself off, zips up, and goes back to the foyer. Julia's lips have officially pursed themselves, and her eyes somehow seem to have defied the laws of physiology and drawn closer together than they were 3 or 4 minutes ago. He calls this her "you fucked my sister" look, though she has no sister. And what he thinks the look really means this evening is, "you drank too much. Now I have to drive." It will remain in place, he figures, until she pulls up outside their building and switches off the engine. He's right about one thing. She hates driving and isn't happy to have to do it tonight. She never drove before she met him. Her car back home is a Honda Accord she seldom drives anywhere except to the grocery store, and even then she stays clear of the freeways. She hates the old Mercedes and has only driven it 2 or 3 times since they bought it. That's not why she looks displeased, though. When Richard was out there on the balcony with her brother, Monika addressed her in the Russian that every school child of their mutual vintage was forced to learn. "You know what I really appreciate about you, Yulisha? If you think I'm a fool for remaining with him, you've never shown it." Richard and Stefan returned before Julia managed to formulate a reply, which is probably fortunate. She doesn't know how she might have responded. What can you say when another woman, who happens to be your brother's wife, makes that kind of statement? Anna, in contrast to her mother, could not possibly appear more radiant. Her golden hair brushes the shoulders of the white faux fur they bought her a few days ago at Macy's, and her face is flushed with excitement. She raises one hand and points at the ceiling. It's her, she tells him. It's like she's following us everywhere. At first, he doesn't have the slightest idea what she's talking about. Then he hears that unmistakable voice. It was written high above that I have to have your love, or I'll never be free. And cloudy though the day be, crazy though I may be, what the stars foretold shall be. Well, he says, there are worse folks to be followed by than Ella Fitzgerald. He puts one arm around her shoulders and the other around her mother's. Then he steers his family out the door. Thank you.